My name is Parma, and I want to talk about podcast monetization or the myths around podcast monetization. Everything I say in this video is going to be pulled from my 7 years of podcasting and 6 years of working in podcast pre and post production. I primarily work as a narrative editor, but I've also worked as a producer and therefore have had a glimpse into analytics of quite a few of my clients. I have seen what works in terms of sponsorship for them, how they manage to get those sponsorships. I also have my personal experience of finding advertisers, working with networks, and also being directly supported by my audience. In this video, though, I want to focus on the myths that new podcasters go into podcasting believing, because I think that's harmful to your journey and it can be pretty discouraging when things don't pan out as they are supposed to, or you're told they are supposed to by other aspiring podcasters who have read it or heard it from somebody else and say on like podcasting forums with a lot of confidence that this is how it's supposed to happen. The reality of the matter is that podcasting has always thrived as a space where small creators gather small dedicated audiences, and in majority of cases they thrive, but that pool never really grows too big. My 7-year-old podcast has had more or less the same number of listeners for the last 3 years. I don't really consider it stagnation because the dedication of that audience and the engagement of that audience has only grown over time, which is reflected in how many signups I've had on our Patreon page. What I do consider really interesting though is how for every podcaster, monetization is a milestone that you have to reach. It's okay if you're not growing that quickly, but reaching monetization is a metric that tells people that they are succeeding. This is true for us too. When the first dollar started coming in, that was a validation matched by little else. However, the honest truth is that my podcast was the rare one that was able to monetize itself in the first year. And we didn't do it through sponsorship or ads, we did it through direct audience support. Honestly, for all small podcasters, if you have a dedicated audience, that is what you should be focusing on, not dynamic ads, not trying to get sponsorships. Let's start with the first monetization myth, dynamic ad insertions. I frankly have a very poor opinion of dynamic ads for small podcasters. If you're a big podcaster, if you have 50,000 downloads, 100,000, a million, yes, dynamic ads would get you a lot of money. But at that point, you're getting so many sponsorship dollars that dynamic ads hardly matter for you. Dynamic ads were created to monetize tiny podcasts because the pennies that make no difference to you, because trust me, unless you're getting downloads in at least 50,000 to 100,000, you're going to be earning pennies, and those pennies will take months to gather. You're not the one who's making money, but the platform or network who's giving you the dynamic ads, they are making money off you because they bundle hundreds and hundreds of podcasts, thousands of podcasts together and sell those dynamic ad spots to an advertiser, an advertising agency. That one ad might get them a big dollar amount, but they will only distribute a fraction of that amount to all of those thousands of podcasts, which is how each of you end up getting a few pennies. Adding ads to your show, interrupting the flow of your show, so your audience has to sit through an ad, is a disruption that you should only allow when you're being paid properly for it, not for pennies. And certainly not when you're getting just a few hundred or a few thousand downloads per episode. Don't do it to your audience and don't sell yourself that cheap. Myth 2, sponsorships. Sponsorships work two ways for small podcasters. A, you already have financing. You have partnered up with a small business or a grant or um, some kind of fund that's made for creatives, and that is what you're pulling your sponsorship from. That's, yes, lucrative, but that support is usually conditional and has like a time frame. So you should consider what happens after that sponsorship runs out. If you can't grow to a certain amount by the end of that period, you will lose out that sponsorship, and suddenly you will no longer have the budget that you started out with. The second way that sponsorships work is once you start growing and you start getting a few thousand downloads per episode, you go out looking for somebody who would buy an ad spot on your show. Now, this can work out for you if you're in the right niche, if your audience demographic has the right kind of spending budget. For instance, finance podcasters tend to have an easier time of finding sponsorship than, let's say, a wellness podcast. Depending on how savvy a salesperson you are, you might still be able to pitch yourself correctly. But this is a lot of hard work, and unless you can get a long term recurring sponsorship, fighting for each ad spot is going to take up a lot of your time and energy. Basically, it's going to start to eat into whatever energy you have to create your own podcast. The next one, affiliate links. Now, this one could actually work, but again, this is an unstable source of income. Also, it builds up over time. So you might see absolutely nobody clicking on your affiliate links in the first year, maybe the second year, and suddenly in the third year, because you had an episode go viral. We have had that. It does happen in broadcasting occasionally. Suddenly people are clicking on, finding your older episodes, clicking on older links, and your affiliate income starts building up. That can absolutely happen. And I will never suggest don't go for it. But unless you're a gear oriented or a technical podcast, if you are somebody whose show is more narrative, story oriented, or conversation oriented, something that is like harder to pinpoint a niche on, or products for, be very careful what you're selling to your audience. If you have an affiliate link for something, make sure it's relevant to your audience, but also relevant to the episode you're linking that under. Because otherwise, the chances of somebody hearing you talk about it and then going to the description and checking out the link is just not just low, it's negative. It can possibly like hurt your image to your growing audience. And finally, let's talk about audience support. This is the number one source of monetization that I would ask smaller podcasters to hone in on, to put their energies into. Build your Patreon page, build your Ko-fi. If you are asking people to donate directly through paypal.me, do that. Have a tip jar. I have found Patreon to work out better than the other alternatives, but it really depends on your particular audience niche. Podcasts in the technological categories tend to thrive better on single donations like paypal.me, Ko-fi, etc. Whereas podcasters in more creative niches tend to find support, sustained support on Patreon. I would absolutely ask you to build up your Patreon page regardless. Don't put in a lot of effort upfront. Make sure that you're posting something there, even if it's twice a month. Build up that page and make the initial tiers very accessible. Don't be ambitious right, from the beginning. However, there's something interesting about Patreon that you should know, and you should absolutely let your audience know, which is that even if you have only one tier and it's for like $3 or $2, the person pledging can pledge literally any amount. The second patron we ever had sign up pledged $20, and that completely blew our mind because we just had like I think a $1 tier. That's all we had. It's been 7 years and they are still sending us $20 every single month. That's what a dedicated audience who really loves your content will do for you. The reason I made this video, to be very honest, is because I've been long frustrated with podcasting industry experts pushing smaller podcasters towards sponsorship and dynamic ads. I think they do it because they know that telling small podcasters that the chances of you starting to earn anything from your podcast is really, really low would not work out very well. A, they would not be buying the industry experts' books, courses, etc. But also, B, it might discourage people from starting out at all because while a lot of people just want this as a creative outlet, a lot of other people want it to be a creative outlet that can also be monetized. And it is dispiriting thinking that maybe that will never happen. However, podcasting is a space that is best suited for people who want a small, dedicated community around them. If you want growth and to reach a really large audience, consider publishing your content on other platforms: YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, even LinkedIn. That's been taking off for the last couple of years. But if you are starting off as a podcaster, or if you have been a podcaster for a while, but you haven't cracked monetization, please understand that not only are you not alone, you are the majority, the vast, vast majority. Cracking monetization through sponsorship and ad spots often depends on how strong your networking skills are, and B, how many downloads you have. And those downloads don't just have to be like 1,000 per month, which is what you're repeatedly told is like the minimum that you need to have to monetize. There are plenty of advertisers who will not take you on into their bank of podcasters unless you have a minimum of 1,000 downloads per month. But even when you are in that bank, those 1,000 listeners will not be valued at the same rate as somebody who has 10,000, 50,000, or 100,000 listeners. And I understand the lure of dynamic ads. Why not just have it play in the background? What can it harm? But I genuinely do think that adding advertising in your podcast, often advertising that is not aligned to your subject matter at all, because dynamic ads really don't take into account exactly what you're talking about. It's barely aligned to your niche at all. That kind of interruption to your audience's listening experience can only hurt your credibility as a creator. And if that's a risk you want to take as a small podcaster for the few pennies you get out of it, well, that's on you. But I thought maybe this could give you another perspective, another way to look at monetization of your podcast. Thank you for watching this entire video. You could have been watching anything else. You decided to watch this whole thing. Thank you so much. My name is Porma, and I will see you next week.